mystical experiences are in fact biologically normal. Last week I published a poll on Instagram and I asked you to tell me how shocked you were by the following statement. The best cure for chronic depression is a single mystical experience. 0 for not shocked at all, and 100 for, oh my gosh, what are you even saying? 64 people responded to that poll, and the average response that I got was 55, which I think, looking back, that might have been the most nuanced poll that I've ever conducted on Instagram. What I want to do in today's video is I want to make the case for you that the best cure for chronic depression is a single mystical experience. And to add a footnote onto that, we're going to find our answer in psychedelic-assisted therapy. But before I even get into the research on psychedelic therapy and mystical experiences occasioned by psychedelic therapy, I want to share with you a story from my life that I haven't really opened up about at length on this channel so far. This is a story that almost made it onto a TEDx stage last year, but for the fact that I got cut in the final round. And at the time, I wasn't even upset about getting cut because intuitively I knew that there was something about my story in the way that it existed last year. Something about that story had been missing, and it was the idea worth sharing. Only recently did I truly understand that what had happened to me was a mystical experience. It was a spontaneously occurring mystical experience, but it wound up curing me of my depression, and it turned my life around. You know, we've talked about PTSD on this channel and how people generally understand that a single event can be so traumatic that it can change you in profound ways. And that I've used a metaphor in a previous video about comparing mystical experiences induced by psychedelics as the inverse of trauma, because it too can change you in profound ways. So I want to leave you with that. And then on the other side of this transition, I'm going to get into my story, and then we're going to take a look at some of the landmark research that's been conducted, so that hopefully by the end of this video, you will see and understand the point that I'm trying to make. I was 19 when I was first diagnosed with major depressive disorder. My doctor put me on several medications, nothing worked. I sought counseling services, that didn't work. I tried praying a little harder, that didn't work. And so for the next 2 years, my friends and family watched as I shrank from someone who had once been so motivated to somebody who couldn't do so much as get out of bed and into the shower. The way that I would describe depression to somebody who doesn't understand is just imagine a condition whereby your mind is constantly lying to you. And it lies to you so much that at some point, you're no longer able to distinguish lies from the truth. And truthfully, you no longer care. My depression had gotten so bad that when my mind started telling me that the only way forward was out, I started to believe it. And one night in December, when I was just 2 weeks shy of my 21st birthday, I tried to act on what my mind had been telling me. So obviously my plans didn't work, and instead I was taken to the hospital where I was held for the next 3 days. I don't know if you guys have ever been in the psych ward, but for me, it was truly like something out of a movie. Like everywhere I looked, there were people, you know, screaming into the air or banging their heads on the walls. And it's one thing to feel like you have compassion for people like this as long as these people remain a construct in your mind, but it's another to be faced with the realization that, holy crap, in this moment, I am these people. Like in this moment, these people are like me. When I was admitted, the ward had been at capacity, so I slept on a stretcher in the common area for the entirety of my stay. I was there for 3 days, but for the most part, I didn't know when I could leave. So really, what the psych ward is about, in addition to being reminded that you are at your absolute rock bottom everywhere you turn, is the only resource you have in there, the only thing that you have is time. And that was really, really difficult for me because for the first time, I really had to sit and just be present in my situation. You know, I can tell you that, yes, I did feel every negative emotion under the sun, and I was terrified, I was ashamed. You go through the entire roller coaster, but by the time day 3 had arrived, I had just set my mind on passing the time by, and I was just looking forward to leaving. Day 3 was also the day that my mystical experience happened for me, and it happened right before I found out that I would be leaving that day. I'd been circling the hallways trying to kill time, and eventually I stopped in front of a bookcase, which I knew had been stocked, entirely with children's novels for some reason. But this time I didn't care because I was so bored. I was willing to read Charlotte's Web. So there I was, searching through the books. And then I land on a flimsy paperback that I hadn't noticed before. And so I take it out, and it turned out to be a copy of the New Testament with the cover torn off. Now, I wouldn't describe myself as a religious person today in that I don't subscribe to any one religious tradition, but at the time I had been searching within the Christian faith, which is why finding this book meant so much to me at the time. Like, it meant so much that in that moment, it felt like all time had come to a standstill. And like I thought I had already had an awareness of what it meant to hit rock bottom, of what it meant to survive an attempt to take my own life. But I didn't fully understand the profundity of the situation I was in up until that point. You know what I recall is I recall looking up, and then a voice came over me, and this voice sounded nothing like the voices in my head. This voice instead was still and stoic, and it told me that the silver lining of feeling like I had nothing to live for was the fact that I also had nothing to lose. And because I had nothing to lose, then I had nothing to be afraid of. And then it clicked. It clicked that it's even hard for me to describe this single moment, but I can tell you that when it clicked, it felt like a ton of bricks had been lifted off my shoulders and the shackles of depression literally melted away. And I know that kind of sounds like, but really, I think shackles would be a good metaphor for what depression is. It's like you're chained to something and it's what you know for so long you don't question it. And then to suddenly see clearly, to see not only through your ego, but just to see into a realm that consists of nothing but interconnectedness and peace and love. I felt for the first time connected to something, and that is what I took comfort in. When I got discharged from the hospital, I was a completely new person. I had a sense of tenacity and fearlessness, and it really carried me into the next chapter of my life. And this was reflected in some of the things that I did that 21st year of my life. I dropped out of the program that I was in. I quit my job. I started a company. We made our first sales that first month. All of these things that I did that would have made the previous version of me feel uncomfortable, but I didn't feel uncomfortable in those situations because I had already been to hell and I survived it. So of course, this sense of fearlessness didn't last me forever. It lasted until I basically felt like I had something to lose again, but it lasted long enough that I was able to write the next chapter of my life and live by design. I understand why the people at TEDx might have rejected my story. I think it's because towards the tail end of it, it starts to sound like something like a cheesy, motivational, you can do it too, you can will your way out of anything. But that's the thing. I don't think I willed my way out of depression. I was cured. I had lost all of my will to live and something happened. Looking back, I understand now it was a mystical experience and it changed me. To the people who are depressed today, my message for you is not, you can get out of this too. That is not my message for you. What I would say to you is, I understand your condition. I understand that your mind is lying to you. I understand the sense of hopelessness and powerlessness you feel. I also don't want you to have to hit rock bottom to maybe find a sense of relief. I don't think that's fair. And I don't think, it's like for me, the fact that I'm here, I recognize how lucky I was. I don't know if I hadn't found that book that meant so much to me at the time, whether or not the mystical experience would have happened for me. And this is why it is so important that we turn this conversation back to meditation, back to psychedelic-assisted therapy. Yes, with meditation, through years of training, there have been so many people who've reported having mystical experiences through their meditation practices. In fact, having a spiritual practice rooted in meditation is a good thing for helping you gain a sense of what is important, for helping you gain a sense of clarity and not having to wait for illness or death to get you there. That's what meditation's for. And I understand that and I appreciate that. Psychedelic therapy is different in its own category because we are talking about a treatment that consistently produces healing, that consistently produces mystical experiences. You don't have to leave it up to chance. I want to tell you now about a landmark study conducted by researchers at Johns Hopkins, in which 51 end-of-life cancer patients were given either a single low dose of psilocybin or a single high dose of psilocybin. At the 5-week follow-up mark, researchers noticed that patients who were given a single high dose of psilocybin demonstrated, quote, large decreases in measures of depressed mood and anxiety, along with increases in quality of life, life meaning, and optimism, end quote. Even more astounding still is the fact that approximately 80% of patients in the high-dose psilocybin group went on to show clinically significant decreases in depressed mood and anxiety 6 months after the initial high dose had been administered. So what this means is that there is something about a high dose of psilocybin that actually produces long-term mental health benefits, and the thing that makes all the difference is a mystical experience. So what exactly is a mystical experience? I think it's important to finally actually define it in the empirical sense, so that we can have an understanding that actually there is nothing mystical about a mystical experience. Last year, researchers at Cardiff University in the UK published a narrative review of the state of research on mystical experiences induced by psilocybin. According to these researchers, the core constitution of mystical experiences include feelings of oneness with all people and things, a sense of peace, awe, and sacredness, a transcendence of normal time and space, and an intuitive belief that what you are experiencing now is a window into the objective nature of reality. Reading this over, that's how I knew that what I had experienced had been a mystical experience. Before then, I didn't have the words to understand what I had been through. Sometimes it really helps to have a label for it, so that you can use that label as a shortcut into a greater library of information to help you understand your subjective experience. Interestingly, there is some debate within academia about the legitimacy of mystical experiences induced by psychedelics. In particular, a lot of this skepticism comes primarily from religious scholars. So they'll say, how can, psilocybin occasioned mystical experiences be thought of as real mystical experiences when we have a whole history of, documented cases of spontaneous mystical experiences? I would argue that if two phenomena are essentially the same in how they are experienced and how they are perceived, then it wouldn't make any sense to say that one is legitimate and the other is not. A mystical experience is a mystical experience, whether it is naturally occurring or psychedelic-induced, whether it occurs in a religious person or in an atheist. And in fact, the fact that we have so many documented cases of mystical experiences happening all throughout humankind, regardless of who, where, how, etc. All of this indicates to many in the scientific realm that mystical experiences are in fact biologically normal. And as such, we can expect for their healing potential to be just as ubiquitous across the board. Psychedelic therapy allows us to not have to leave healing up to chance. As an intervention, it is reliable, cost-effective. It doesn't require you to take a pill every day for the rest of your life, and it comes with minimal side effects. And furthermore, all of this, the way that this model has been developed and is now being studied, this model of psychedelic therapy fits within our current medical framework. The more I learn about psychedelic therapy, the more saddened I become about the fact that psychedelic therapy doesn't already occupy more space within our current collective consciousness. Like you guys know, depression is the #1 cause of disability worldwide, and depression rates and anxiety disorders have only skyrocketed over the past year. We are truly in the midst of a mental health crisis. What we need is a treatment protocol that is robust, that actually works, that leads to healing, that doesn't just numb us out, but actually makes us feel so that we can find the answers within ourselves. I truly believe that every single one of us has it within us. Like I've seen in my own life, I've been at rock bottom, and I've also known what it's like to get out of rock bottom. And that is what makes life so worth living. And I know this video isn't going to convince any lawmakers of anything, but I hope that at the very least, if it can inspire hope in those who are feeling powerless right now in their present situation, then I will have done my job.